Thank you all for being here. My name is Ralph Savelsberg. I'm from the Netherlands, but I used to live in the UK, so I come to UK LEGO shows regularly. I've built a very large aircraft that you may have seen in the main hall. It's a model of a B-52 bomber, and I'm going to talk to you about how I built this. Now, I've been building aircraft for a very long time. I started building with LEGO probably when I could first put two bricks together when I was about 2 or 3. And I built airfix models when I was a teenager, but I was never very good at them because building airfix models or similar things involves a lot of painting and glue and sanding, and I'm an impatient person. So, and I was never very good at the painting. But I was a reasonable LEGO builder, so I started building airplane models out of LEGO. And I've always had an interest in military aviation, and I'm a physicist and I work for the Defense Department, so technology and the military, that has my interest. And I've built a lot of planes. These are not all the planes I've built, they are all the planes I have at home at the moment. So it's 54 aircraft and helicopter models. And I'm planning more. Now most of these are built to a scale of 1 in 36, so this means they are 36 times as small as the real thing. And that means that, you know, they are not ridiculously, monstrously large. You can see this jet here, and you can see me holding it up. It's about, you know, this big. It's reasonable. You can fit it in your suitcase. And this scale is a bit of a compromise. These models are large enough so that I can include a lot of details. For instance, I can make the cockpit canopy open, as you can see on this one. This is an F-14 Tomcat. That thing is called an Osprey, and it's an aircraft-helicopter hybrid. It can tilt these rotors horizontally and then take off like a helicopter, and then in flight can tilt them forward and fly as an aircraft. And these things can tilt on my model as well, and this thing, because it's used on aircraft carriers, can also fold its wing, and my model can do all of that. So the scale 1 in 36 is large enough for me to include that sort of stuff, and I like building things that work. When you're building a scale model with LEGO, one of the things you run into is the size of the LEGO brick. There's a sort of minimum size of things and details that you can build, which is set by the size of the smallest parts that you can buy. So if you want to build a very detailed or realistically shaped model of an aircraft and make it very small, it's going to be very hard because the parts are quite large compared to the size of the thing you're building. But 1 in 36 is large enough for me to be able to recreate the shape quite reasonably. And you can see that here, this is a photograph of my LEGO model of an F-18 Hornet. And in red, the lines on top of it, they are a drawing of the aircraft when seen from the side. And you can see that they match quite well. So this scale is large enough for me to be able to sort of sculpt the difficult shapes that an aircraft has. That would become easier as the plane gets larger. However, if the plane becomes too large, you run into other problems, structural problems. It simply becomes too heavy. I mean, LEGO is fairly strong stuff, which everybody, you know, who's ever stepped on a LEGO brick knows. But it can't, you know, there are some limits to what you can do. And the undercarriage on a LEGO model is usually, the aircraft model is usually the bit that takes most of the strain because it's relatively small and spindly and it has to carry the entire weight of the model. And I also like building undercarriages that can fold, which obviously means that they are even more fragile. And on this scale, I can build an undercarriage that can fold. This is a model of a Harrier, which is originally a British jet, although the RAF has sold theirs to the Americans. And here you can see the wheels. There are little doors that I can open, and then I can fold the wheels in and close the doors, and here you can see that they're gone. So I didn't take them off, I could actually fold them into the plane, as they do on the real jet. Now if you start building a larger plane, that becomes harder and harder. But building large is fun. And those of you who are here for the previous talk will know that big things are impressive, and it's also fun to build. And about 5 years ago, I decided it's time to build a large jet. And this is the jet I chose. It's an American bomber, a B-1B. And this photograph doesn't really show you how large it is until you realize that I'm here in this picture. So I was standing underneath it, reaching up, and I couldn't touch it. So it's a big jet. And when I build a big jet to the same scale as my smaller jets, I'm going to end up with a large model, obviously. So this is my model of the B-1 with two of my other aircraft next to it, and you can see that it's much larger. It was the largest model that I built to that time, and it's 1.2 meters long, and it used approximately 8,000 parts. Now I don't count the parts when I'm building because I'm too busy building, but so it might be 7,000, it might be 9,000, but that's a ballpark figure. And the undercarriage is the tricky bit. This is a photograph taken with my camera lying underneath the model. It's large enough to do that. And you can see the wheels here. And these bits are bending a bit out of shape. And that's because of the weight of the model pressing down on it. So as you go to larger planes, this will get more and more difficult, unless you can put steel in it or glue things. But I'm not a professional Lego builder, and I don't have health and safety rules to take into account. So I don't glue my Lego, I just try to do everything with Lego bricks and use them the way they were intended to. Now when this was done, I was quite relieved, but then sort of 2 years later I started thinking, oh, that was fun, I want a bigger one. And the obvious thing to do was build a bigger bomber, and this is another American bomber, the B-52 Stratofortress, and that's the plane I decided I wanted to build. Now this is enormous. I'll show you some photographs later where you can get an idea of how large the real thing is. Whenever I build an aircraft, I start by gathering reference books. So this is the collection that I sort of gathered over a few years, and this is one of them. And I use those reference books to get a lot of photographs of all the details, but also to get good drawings that show the aircraft from the top and from the side. And I use those drawings to work out the size of my model. And I don't know whether this is very visible to you, but this is one of the drawings that I made. It shows the fuselage in this direction, and I've worked out how many studs the fuselage should be long on a scale of 1 in 36, and also the wing, and at what angle the wing was going to sit, and things like how far should the wheels be apart. I always do this before I start building, because certainly with something this big, if you just start building at random, and then sort of midway through you realize that you've messed up somewhere, it's a big job to try to fix it again. So it's better to have a clear idea of where you're going with this, so that you know how big the various things of this thing should be. And of course, I had to gather a lot of parts. This is going to be bigger than my B1, and I hate to take apart a model that I have, so I didn't take apart the B1 to build this. I started from scratch, and I buy my Lego from a shop in the form of a Lego set. Most of the parts that I have were bought from a store. And there are some limits to how much money I'm willing to spend on this hobby. So it was taking a long time. From the start of this project to having close to enough parts to be able to do it took about 3 years. I mean, I did lots of other things during that time, but in the background I was constantly applying dark gray Lego to be able to build this. And well, this may look like a lot of parts. These are the leftovers. So the pile was a lot larger when I started building. But I wasn't getting anywhere with some parts. I mean, my Lego parts come from sets, and you know, you might want to have, say, 6 of a particular element, but the set you buy only has 2 of them. Now that could mean that, you know, if you have enough money to spend, you buy 3 sets, But when you're talking about an aircraft this size, we're talking about hundreds of parts. So there were certain elements of which I needed maybe 200, and the biggest number you could get in a set was 4. I can't buy 50 Lego sets, that's ridiculous. Now there are websites where you can buy individual pieces. There's a website called Bricklink where people who do buy 50 sets part them out and sell you the individual bits, but that sounds too much like work. And for some of the bits that I needed, there were no Bricklink sellers who had the quantities that I needed. So I ended up buying them in small quantities at a time, and this was taking forever, until I got lucky. Lego in the United States, they released a range of sets that are called Master Builder Academy. And it's a set with a certain theme, say cars, and there are parts in it to build a car, and there's a big ideas book in it with instructions and tips on how to build cars with Lego. And that book also has an article in it that shows models built by a fan. And I was lucky because Lego did an aviation-themed Master Builder Academy set. And they asked me to write part of the article that was going in there with the inspirational models, and they paid me in bricks. So they said they basically said, "Do you have a list of bricks that you would want?" Oh, did I? Did I have it? So that allowed me to finally get some of the parts that I needed in ridiculous quantities. And last year, during the Summer Olympics, I had my own little marathon. I could finally start building. And because I knew I had the parts. And I always start building with the difficult bits. And on this plane, I'll show you a few of the things that were difficult. This is one of the engine pods, which has a complicated shape, and it needs to be attached to the wing, which is hard. So that was one of the first things I did. And this is part of the forward fuselage, which has a complicated shape as well, with curves in all kinds of directions and lots of lumps and bumps. I'll show you that in a bit more detail. And the undercarriage. I showed you the undercarriage of the B-1, which was straining under the weight. And this is going to be a bigger plane, so more problems with the undercarriage. And also, the B-52 bomber has a funny sort of undercarriage with wheels that sit under the fuselage, and then one set of wheels retracts forward, and another set of wheels retracts aft to lie inside the fuselage. And you can see them here doing a sort of odd little dance as they're being retracted on a photograph of a real jet. This is version 1 of the undercarriage for my B-1, and you can see it looks quite spindly, but this is with what it would look like when extended, and this is what it looks like from the top when it's retracted. And you can see indeed that I have one unit that goes up, forward, and another unit that goes aft.
Please come to the main reception. That's Mr. and Mrs. Ross. Thank you.
So this kind of worked, but it was not strong enough. When I built the plane and put it on its wheels, it collapsed. So design number 2, that went okay for a while until I added more bits to the plane and it collapsed. Version 3, well, this is version 5, which is already a bit beefier, and I think the version that's on the plane as it is on display is version 7 or 8. And that is sturdy enough to carry the weight of the plane, but I've put the plane on a few struts to give it extra support, because it is designed to support the weight of the plane, but it is not childproof. So yesterday a child yanked one of the wings and rotated the whole model, and the undercarriage wouldn't have been able to do that. That would require version 75 probably before that would work. So the undercarriage, I mentioned the shape of the nose. This is a photograph of the actual jet that I modeled. It has this sort of weird nose. The American, many air forces, including the American Air Force, named their planes. Certainly B-52s, which have been around for a long time. Most of the individual jets have a name, and the one that I built is based in Louisiana in the United States, and it's named Cajun Fear. And there's a crocodile there, so Cajuns who live in Louisiana are afraid of crocodiles, which makes sense. Cajun Fear. As you can see, It's got little windows, and it's got weird curves, and it's got this bump here, and the lump there, and some intakes, and all this sort of stuff I think is important when I build a scale model. So, and it's difficult. And this is the nose section of my plane as I was building it, and I was getting pretty close to the ultimate shape with this little bump there and bulges there. And difficult bit, and I wanted to get that right, because you don't want to spend a few years gathering parts and then weeks building to end up with something and then look at it and go, that doesn't really look like a B-52. Right? There are certain bits you need to get right. Now, even more important than the nose section was the wings. And this is a photograph that shows the B-52 from the top. And you can see they are enormous. They are very long, very long wings, and it's got 8 engines. When B-52s were first built, jet engines weren't as powerful as they are now. And to give this thing sufficient performance, they had to use 8 of the biggest jet engines that were around at the time. So 8 engines. And when you build this out of Lego, it will be very heavy. You'll have these heavy lumps of Lego suspended from the wings. So making the wings very strong was very important. And you can also see that they are swept back. Like they sort of form an arrow shape. And that means that this bit here, where the wings come together and meet the fuselage, needs to be really, really, really strong. Otherwise the wings will simply sag or rip from the fuselage, and it won't work. So designing this bit that holds the wings on, that was the hardest thing on it. The nose was easy, the undercarriage was easy. This had to be done, this had to work. So I did a lot of design work, went into building the wings and into figuring out how to make the angle that I wanted and how to make it strong enough. I think that this is a little sketch where I started off trying to work out the geometry. This shows the entire wing, and this is the wing central section. And you know, being a physicist kind of helps with this sort of thing, because I used a bit of mathematics to work out the angles and how to make it strong. And this didn't go through a lot of versions. The version that's on the plane is version 1. It worked straight away, which was good, because otherwise I'd have to peel the whole thing apart again. So version 1 worked. And once I started building it, things went very quickly. So these are a few photographs that I took during the build. I started with that wing central section, and after about 5 days, I built the wings out quite a bit. This is the lower part of the wing. It doesn't have upper surfaces yet, but a couple of days later, you can see this is now from below. The wing is complete, and I've got the engines mounted on it. And then a couple of days later, I was working at the time as well, so this was done during the weekends and in evening hours. A couple of days later, you can see the fuselage is starting to grow. And yet more days later, you know, the wings and the fuselage, they were all there, but there was some bits missing and the tail wasn't on it. But, you know, after about 3 weeks, the monster was finally ready. I mean the plane, obviously, not the guy. This is me holding it up to the camera, so you can get an idea of well, quite how large it is. You don't know how heavy it is, but I was very glad when the picture was finally taken, because I was training. And it is by far the biggest aircraft that I've ever built. And those of you who are here for Ed's talk, you saw his A380. My jet is bigger than his. Well, it's very obvious, you know, that I would say that. Size matters. This is the B-1 that I showed you before, which was my largest aircraft prior to building the B-52, 1.2 meters long. This is the B-52, and you can see it's not all that much longer. It's 1.5 meters long. 1.35 meters long, but it's got this enormous wing, which has a span of 1 meter 57. It's very big, it uses approximately 13,000 parts. And once again, you know, I wasn't counting. And I knew when I built it that I was going to show it at some events at some point. So it was designed such that I can take it apart in sections. Not the wing, because making something that's very strong, but then very easy to take apart so that you can move it around, that's not really possible. So the wing is one big strong piece, which I can strap to a wooden board with a lot of bubble wrap and then sort of put in the van. But the aft end, this is the tail section, that can come off, and the forward part of the fuselage can come off, and I pull off the engines, and I can move it around a bit more easily. Well, here's the model again, and if you haven't seen it yet, it is in the main hall, and you are very welcome to have a closer look at it there. I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Are there any questions? The question is, what's next? Something small. I'm building a small car at the moment, a Ferrari. And I don't have any plans for any large aircraft anytime soon, because this was, I suppose I said that after I built the B-1. I'm not going to build another large aircraft. So maybe in 5 years' time I'll have an even bigger one here, but I'm not making any promises. You've got a question?
What pieces did you use?
The hardest piece to find. Well, I can tell you, you can see these. It's got these bombs underneath. It's got 12 of those, and each of those bombs consists of about 20 pieces. Some of those green pieces were hard to get hold of, and I had to spend a lot of money and made a lot of people very happy by buying enough to build those bombs. So those were some of the hardest pieces.
Have you ever been commissioned to build the aircraft?
I've been asked many times, but I've always said no, because this is a hobby. I have a day job, and I like building stuff that I like, and not so much building stuff that other people like. So, or maybe not necessarily. I mean, if somebody were to come and say, I'll give you a vast quantity of money to build an F-14 Tomcat, which is my favorite plane by far, then I might be tempted. But so far, I've always turned people down. There's another question. No question?
Just like put a hand up.
So the question is, what am I going to do with the model, basically? I don't know. Obviously, I don't like taking my models apart because I've got 54 of the things in my loft. For this, I bought a new table, and it looks very nice in the corner in my loft. And I don't have any plans to take it apart. Maybe eventually, the room that it's in will be used for its original purpose, a bedroom. But for the time being, that room is dedicated to my Lego with the B-52 as the centerpiece. So yeah, it's probably going to stay around for a while.
I was just wondering, do you what sort of building instructions do you keep for these things? So like if you dropped it and you needed to rebuild it?
Okay. I have made building instructions for some of my models. But for this, I imagine that making the building instructions is about as much work as building the model. So if I were to drop it, I might just build it again. 12,000 pieces, the building instructions would be like a phone book, probably. So no, I don't have instructions for this one. I have instructions for a couple of smaller models, which I've shared over the internet, because people keep asking, do you have instructions? And occasionally I feel that I like to give that sort of thing away so that people can build their own little version. But to be frank, I don't need instructions to build these, and I reckon that if I were to make instructions, It took me 3 years to gather the parts. I don't think there are a lot of people who will want to spend 3 years gathering the parts to build a copy of this model. So very few people would actually enjoy the benefit of having these instructions. They simply wouldn't be able to build it anyway. Do you want the microphone?
Have you ever builded any watercrafts?
I have, but not any large ones. And that's a funny question. I work for the Royal Netherlands Navy, and my colleagues, or some of my colleagues, know about this, and they've been pushing me to build a ship. So I've never built a large, or haven't built a large ship recently, but it's possible that I'm going to build some Royal Netherlands Navy ship at some point, which presumably will end up on in a future show here. Any more questions? No? Your daughter doesn't have any more questions either? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your attention.